On August 6, 1945, the world awoke to a new and terrifying reality. Little Boy, the first atomic bomb, exploded over Hiroshima, marking the beginning of a dark new chapter in human history. 3 days later, Fat Man destroyed Nagasaki, leaving behind indescribable devastation. On board the B-29 bomber Enola Gay was Colonel Paul Tibbets, who dropped a weapon capable of annihilating an entire city in seconds. President Harry S. Truman called it the greatest thing in history, but what happened in those moments goes far beyond any notion of greatness. At the heart of these explosions, hundreds of thousands of lives were instantly erased, and the suffering of the survivors began a nightmare with unimaginable consequences. How did these devastating attacks affect the people caught within their destructive radius? The atomic gamble, a decisive turn in history. In the late 1920s, Germany found itself trapped in the ruins of an economy shattered by World War I. The signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, which imposed humiliating conditions and exorbitant reparations, left the country in a critical state. Uncontrolled inflation, massive unemployment, and growing social instability created the perfect breeding ground for the rise of radical movements. In this context of despair, a charismatic leader emerged to promise the restoration of Germany's glory and power, Adolf Hitler. With a speech charged with nationalist fervor and hatred toward internal enemies, Hitler managed to connect with a population deeply wounded by defeat and impoverishment. Exploiting the crisis, the Nazi Party consolidated itself, fueling an environment of hatred and xenophobia that soon became the backbone of the regime. The infamous Reichstag fire in 1933, an event that Hitler himself used to blame the communists, marked the beginning of an unstoppable rise toward authoritarianism. In 1934, Hitler proclaimed himself Führer, gaining absolute control of the country and beginning to chart a path toward territorial expansion and the conquest of Europe. While Hitler consolidated his power in Europe, a new threat began to emerge thousands of miles away in the United States. In Berlin, at the end of 1938, scientists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann made a discovery that would forever change the course of human history: nuclear fission. This phenomenon, in which the nucleus of an atom splits into two parts, releasing an enormous amount of energy, opened the door to the creation of a new source of destructive power. The possibility that the Nazis could control this technology was terrifying. If Germany mastered nuclear fission, it could develop an atomic bomb with the power to destroy entire cities. The news of the discovery of nuclear fission sent waves of alarm through the scientific community and Allied leaders, who feared Hitler might use this knowledge to create weapons of mass destruction. It was then that two of the most influential scientists of the time, Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard, decided to intervene. Concerned about the potential of a Nazi atomic bomb, they sent a letter to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt on August 2, 1939, warning about the risks. In that letter, they alerted him that the new phenomenon of nuclear fission could be used to build bombs of enormous destructive power, urging Roosevelt to take steps to get ahead of the Nazis in the race for the atomic bomb. This act of warning laid the foundation for what would later be known as the Manhattan Project, a joint effort by scientists from the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada that would lead to the development of the first atomic bomb. However, as the world prepared for a war of devastating proportions, the Nazis were not standing idle. The atomic gamble had been set in motion, and the shadow of a new weapon capable of destroying entire cities began to loom over Europe. The Manhattan Project, the race for the atomic bomb. In the late 1930s, as World War II loomed with increasing intensity, a secret project began to take shape in the United States. This project, later known as the Manhattan Project, had a clear and terrifying goal: to develop the first atomic bomb. In a world where war threatened to overwhelm all boundaries of civilization, the possibility of the Nazi regime obtaining nuclear weapons sparked a desperate race to ensure that this threat would not materialize. On August 2, 1939, scientists Albert Einstein and Leo Szilard sent a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning about Nazi Germany's ability to produce an atomic bomb. This urgent message became the catalyst that propelled the United States to embark on one of the most ambitious scientific endeavors in history. On December 6, 1941, just before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Roosevelt officially authorized the Manhattan Project, a colossal effort to develop a bomb that could change the course of the war. Under the leadership of General Leslie Groves, a man known for his relentless determination, the Manhattan Project spread across multiple secret locations throughout the United States. Groves not only led the project, but also oversaw the mobilization of more than 130,000 people, from engineers to technicians, in an operation that would cost nearly $2 billion, an amount that today would be equivalent to about $23 billion. Every aspect of the project was surrounded by absolute secrecy, with the mission of preventing any leaks that could jeopardize its progress. At the heart of the project, in the laboratory of Los Alamos, New Mexico, some of the brightest minds in the world were concentrated. Robert Oppenheimer, a highly respected American physicist, was chosen to lead the laboratory. Oppenheimer, who combined an exceptional mind with visionary leadership, played a key role in the development of the atomic bomb. The scientists at Los Alamos worked tirelessly, facing unprecedented technical challenges while trying to understand and apply the complexities of nuclear physics. In addition to Los Alamos, research centers in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, became key epicenters of the effort. At these sites, scientists and technicians faced the monumental task of building and perfecting nuclear reactors and isotope separation facilities that would be needed to fuel the bombs. Meanwhile, the world remained embroiled in war, and the Manhattan Project's clock ticked toward a revelation that would change history forever. The scale of the operation and the sacrifices made in the secret laboratories reflected the urgency and magnitude of the mission. Every scientific breakthrough, every discovery at Los Alamos, every mathematical formula applied, brought the world one step closer to a new era of devastation and power. Thus, amidst the chaos of World War II, the creation of the atomic bomb became a symbol of the force and destructiveness of science when confronted with the shadows of war. Los Alamos, a secret haven for geniuses. Hidden in the remote New Mexico desert stood Los Alamos, a secretive scientific hub where some of the brightest minds of the 20th century gathered to change the course of history. Established in 1943 as Project Y, it was the birthplace of the Manhattan Project, aimed at developing the first atomic bomb. Known as The Hill by its residents, Los Alamos was not just a research center, but a unique community of brilliant scientists working under intense pressure to harness the power of the atom. At the helm of the project was J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director, whose leadership and vision guided the team through uncertain and turbulent times. Oppenheimer, with his deep interest in philosophy, literature, and poetry, cultivated an environment that encouraged both intellectual and creative exploration. His enigmatic personality and ability to balance complex ideas with a humane approach made Los Alamos a place where scientific rigor and intellectual freedom coexisted. Life at Los Alamos was a constant juxtaposition of extremes, isolated from the outside world, with strict censorship and limited communication. The scientists led lives that shifted between the ordinary and the extraordinary. In their downtime, they found solace in simple pleasures like watching films, playing tennis, or enjoying picnics in the barren desert, offering brief respites from the weight of their work on a weapon of unimaginable power. Among the notable figures at Los Alamos was Richard Feynman, a brilliant and charismatic physicist known not only for his scientific genius, but also for his irreverent sense of humor. Feynman's relationship with his wife Arlene, who was battling tuberculosis, added a deeply human dimension to the otherwise high-pressure environment. Despite the difficult circumstances, Feynman kept the team's spirits high with his playful pranks and jokes, becoming a beloved figure whose warmth and wit lightened the mood. Another key member was Enrico Fermi, Nobel laureate and one of the founding figures of nuclear physics. Fermi's ability to simplify complex scientific concepts was instrumental in solving some of the project's toughest problems. His clear thinking and methodical approach inspired not only those around him, but also future generations of scientists. Despite the immense pressure and secrecy surrounding their work, the scientists at Los Alamos formed close bonds and experienced moments of camaraderie that helped them navigate the emotional and intellectual challenges of the project. Each of them understood the gravity of what they were creating, a weapon that could change the world forever. And though their work was shrouded in mystery, they knew they were writing a new chapter in history, one that would impact not just the war but the future of humanity. The Trinity test. A new nuclear era. On July 16, 1945, the world entered a new era with the first detonation of a nuclear weapon at the Trinity test in the New Mexico desert. Overseen by J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, this test marked the beginning of the atomic age. The name Trinity, drawn from a poem by John Donne, symbolized both the explosive power and the profound spiritual weight of the event. As the countdown began, the tension was palpable. No one knew for certain what the explosion would unleash. At zero, the sky erupted into a blinding fireball, its brilliance visible from miles away. The shockwave that followed rippled across the desert, leaving witnesses, including physicist Isidore Rabi, in stunned silence. Rabi compared it to the closest thing to the final judgment one could imagine as the magnitude of the event became clear. It was not just a scientific breakthrough, but a philosophical one, as humanity had now unlocked the power to destroy on an unprecedented scale. The test also revealed astounding scientific phenomena. Temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun melted metals, and the force of the explosion brought new insights into atomic energy. The Trinity test changed the global balance of power, signaling the beginning of the nuclear age, where mass destruction was possible but also paving the way for revolutionary scientific advancements. It marked a profound turning point, leaving humanity to grapple with the promises and dangers of nuclear power. The Potsdam Conference. Decisions that would change the world. The summer of 1945 marked a crucial point in World War II history, not only for military advances, but also for the decisions that would reshape the global order. From July 17th to August 2nd, the leaders of the Allied nations gathered at the Schloss Sicilienhof Palace in Potsdam, Germany. At this historic conference, US President Harry S. Truman, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who was replaced by Clement Attlee during the negotiations, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin discussed the future of Europe and the world following the fall of the Third Reich. However, amid the tense discussions about the political and territorial future of the region, one decision loomed large: the use of the atomic bomb. The news that the Manhattan Project had successfully tested an atomic bomb in the New Mexico desert, known as the Trinity test, reached Truman during the conference. With this information, Truman not only had a new bargaining chip, but also faced a decision that would forever change the nature of warfare. As the Potsdam Conference progressed, the option to use the atomic bomb against Japan emerged as a means to hasten the end of the war in the Pacific, avoiding a costly ground invasion. The choice of target cities for the bomb was not a trivial process. It was a decision laden with immense responsibility, as the selection of targets had to be meticulously calculated to ensure that the destructive power of the new weapon would be clear. The committee tasked with identifying the targets included key figures, such as General Leslie Groves and J. Robert Oppenheimer, who defined the criteria. The cities needed to be of high strategic importance and densely populated to maximize the visual and psychological impact of the detonation. After exhaustive analysis, Hiroshima, Kokura, Nagasaki, and Nagata were selected as potential targets. Hiroshima, a port city in the southwest of Japan with a population of around 350,000, housed important military installations, including army bases and supply centers. Meanwhile, Nagasaki, a key industrial city and vital war logistics port, had approximately 270,000 inhabitants. Both cities, strategically located and with dense urban areas, were chosen for their ability to demonstrate the devastating reach of the atomic bomb. Of these, Hiroshima and Nagasaki would ultimately bear the heaviest cost in human history. The decision to use the atomic bomb was made not only to speed Japan's surrender, but also to send a clear message to the Allies and the world at large about the new technological and military era that had just begun. With Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the first targets of this unprecedented destructive power, humanity stepped into an era marked by nuclear uncertainty, where the planet's survival would hinge on the management of these new and lethal weapons. The birth of Little Boy and Fat Man in Los Alamos, New Mexico, two of the most destructive weapons in history were developed, altering the course of humanity forever. Codenamed Little Boy and Fat Man, these atomic bombs represented the peak of nuclear science, unleashing an unimaginable destructive power that even their creators could not fully grasp. The creation of Little Boy was a monumental challenge. Led by scientists like Robert Serber, the bomb was fueled with uranium-235, a rare and highly fissionable isotope. The process of obtaining enough uranium-235 involved complex gaseous diffusion at the Oak Ridge plant in Tennessee, and each gram of uranium-235 could release more energy than 2,000 tons of TNT. The bomb's design was simple, using a gun-type mechanism where two subcritical pieces of uranium-235 were fired together using conventional explosives, initiating a nuclear chain reaction. The simplicity of the design contrasted with its immense destructive power, which could vaporize everything in its path in an instant. Meanwhile, another team at Los Alamos, including scientists like Richard Feynman and Robert Christie, worked on the more complex Fat Man. Unlike Little Boy, Fat Man was based on plutonium-239, a more efficient but harder-to-handle fissionable material. Its design featured a spherical shape with a concentric implosion mechanism, where conventional explosives compressed the plutonium core into a supercritical mass, producing a far more powerful explosion than Little Boy's gun-type design. While Little Boy was simpler, Fat Man was more technically challenging due to the difficulties of handling plutonium and the precise timing required for the implosion. However, the team, including physicists like Enrico Fermi, overcame these challenges, creating a bomb with much greater destructive potential. The creation of both bombs pushed the limits of nuclear physics and raised profound ethical questions about the use of science for war. Little Boy, using uranium-235, and Fat Man, using plutonium-239 and an implosion mechanism, set the standard for future nuclear weapons. Their impact was immediately devastating, culminating in the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, marking the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. Hiroshima, the first atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima, a Japanese city previously untouched by the relentless bombings of the Pacific War, became the site of a world-changing event. At 8:15 a.m., the B-29 bomber Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb in combat, codenamed Little Boy. This moment marked a pivotal point in history, dividing time into two distinct eras, the world before nuclear power and the world after. Hiroshima, with a population of about 350,000, was going through its usual morning routine. Although an air raid warning had been issued at 7:09 a.m., it was quickly dismissed, and life continued as normal. However, at precisely 8:15 a.m., a blinding flash brighter than the sun erupted, followed by an explosion so loud it seemed to tear the very air apart. The explosion unleashed the power of nuclear fission, a force years in the making by the scientists of the Manhattan Project. At the epicenter, temperatures soared to millions of degrees, instantly vaporizing everything in its radius: buildings, vehicles, trees, and people. Farther out, structures were torn apart by the shockwave, and the city was blanketed by a layer of dust and destruction, transforming it into a wasteland. The mushroom cloud rose into the sky, forever symbolizing the dawn of the nuclear age. In mere seconds, Hiroshima was reduced to silence and ruin. Those caught near the explosion were vaporized instantly, while those further away suffered severe burns from the radiation. Human shadows were left imprinted on concrete and metal, haunting reminders of the horrific force unleashed that day. On board the Enola Gay, co-pilot Robert Lewis recorded his shock in his diary, witnessing the unimaginable destruction from the air. The immediate aftermath of the explosion was devastating, with radiation affecting everything in its path. As survivors stumbled through the rubble, they found thousands of injured people, many suffering from severe burns and radiation sickness. Hiroshima, once a thriving city, was reduced to rubble, covered in radioactive dust. This moment in history did more than change the lives of the people of Hiroshima. It altered the course of World War II. The decision to use the atomic bomb was not just an act of destruction, but a message to the world about the power humanity had now unlocked. Hiroshima's name became forever associated with both the devastation it endured and the symbol of scientific power turned into a weapon of war. The long-term effects of radiation continued to affect survivors for decades, serving as a constant reminder of the profound impact this event had on the global balance of power. Nagasaki, the second atomic bomb. On August 9, 1945, 3 days after the devastating attack on Hiroshima, the world witnessed a repeat of the tragedy, this time in Nagasaki. The original target for this second bombing was Kokura, but a dense layer of clouds and smoke covering the city prevented the mission from being carried out. Thus, the dark fate of being the second victim fell on Nagasaki, a city that, despite being a major industrial center, had a mountainous geography that would result in a different type of devastation. At 11:02 a.m., the B-29 bomber boxcar, under the command of Major Charles W. Sweeney, positioned itself over Nagasaki. On board was Fat Man, a plutonium bomb much more powerful than Little Boy, which had destroyed Hiroshima 3 days earlier. Unlike Hiroshima, where the goal was to annihilate the city entirely, Nagasaki was bombed in a more mountainous terrain, resulting in a somewhat more contained, yet still catastrophic, destruction. With a deafening roar, the bomb was released from the boxcar and detonated approximately 500 meters above the city, creating a blinding fireball and a mushroom cloud that rapidly ascended into the air. Within seconds, 1/3 of Nagasaki was wiped off the map, and flames scorched everything in their path. The explosion instantly killed about 40,000 people, while the final death toll, including those who succumbed to injuries and radiation, surpassed 70,000. Nagasaki's geography, surrounded by mountains, caused the explosion's shockwave to concentrate in a smaller area compared to Hiroshima, limiting the extent of the destruction. However, the consequences were equally devastating. Naval shipbuilding factories and military installations, which were the primary targets of the attack, were reduced to rubble. But the city also housed a significant Christian community. The Urakami Cathedral, the largest Catholic church in the East, was destroyed in the blast, and with it, an important cultural and religious center was extinguished. Among the ruins, stories of survivors like Dr. Takashi Nagi, a Catholic radiologist who, despite being exposed to lethal doses of radiation, survived the attack, emerged. Nagasaki's tragedy, like that of Hiroshima, became a narrative of human suffering but also of resilience. In the days that followed, survivors faced not only the immediate physical aftermath, but also the long-term effects of radiation exposure. Nagasaki and Hiroshima, though different in geography and the nature of their destruction, share a fundamental characteristic. Both cities witnessed the unchecked power of nuclear technology, a force capable of irrevocably altering the course of human history. As the echoes of the explosion dissipated and the victims were buried, the world changed forever. The Hibakusha Chronicles. Following the devastation that would forever mark Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a group emerged whose experiences would become an essential testimony to the nuclear tragedy, the hibakusha. This Japanese term, literally meaning survivor of the bomb, describes those who, after the atomic bombings of 1945, lived to share their harrowing stories of suffering, resistance, and loss. Their voices, often filled with pain yet marked by an indomitable strength, became living reminders of the catastrophe and a warning for future generations. One of the most moving stories is that of Sadako Sasaki, a 2-year-old girl who lived just 1.6 kilometers from the epicenter of the Hiroshima explosion. After Little Boy detonated, Sadako was violently thrown from her house, but miraculously survived with no apparent injuries. However, years later, the insidious effects of radiation began to manifest. At the age of 11, Sadako was diagnosed with leukemia, a disease directly linked to the exposure from the atomic bomb. During her final days, Sadako clung to an ancient Japanese legend. If someone folded 1,000 paper cranes, a wish would come true. She began the task in hopes of surviving, but passed away in 1955 before completing her goal. At her funeral, her classmates finished folding the 1,000 cranes, and Sadako's poignant story became a global symbol of peace. The Children's Peace Monument in Hiroshima, dedicated to her memory, has become a pilgrimage site where thousands of paper cranes from around the world are offered each year in honor of her life and the desire for a world free of nuclear weapons. Another story is that of Sumiteru Taniguchi, one of many that illustrate human strength in the face of nuclear tragedy. In 1945, Taniguchi was just 16 years old and worked as a mailman in Nagasaki. When Fat Man was dropped on the city, he was about 3 kilometers from the epicenter. The explosion hit him with full force, causing severe burns on his back and left arm. Despite the intensity of his injuries, Taniguchi not only survived but dedicated his life to reminding future generations of the horrors of nuclear war. For the next 2 years after the explosion, Taniguchi lived in constant physical pain, undergoing painful treatments while struggling to maintain his health. His determination and testimony made him one of the most important voices among the hibakusha, sharing his experience with the world in an attempt to ensure that future generations understood the horror and devastation that can be triggered by nuclear weapons. The stories of Sadako, Sumiteru, and many other hibakusha continue to be essential for understanding not only the physical and emotional impact of the atomic bombings, but also the deep pain of living in a world where the fear of nuclear destruction remains a constant threat. The hibakusha are not only witnesses of the past, but by sharing their stories continue to shape the present, teaching about the devastating effects of war and the importance of peace. Through their voices, humanity continues to learn the deepest lessons from the history of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, not just about the suffering that war inflicts, but about human resilience, the desire for peace, and the hope for a future free of nuclear weapons. Future generations have a responsibility to listen to these voices and do everything possible to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. The hibakusha, with their pain and bravery, remain the guardians of that memory, the echoes of atomic devastation. When the deafening roars of atomic bombs gave way to an unsettling silence, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of a horrific chapter in human history. The immediate impact of the bombs was catastrophic, but the long-term consequences proved even more insidious, leaving an enduring mark on the survivors' bodies and minds. The suffering and destruction of the atomic age left a painful legacy, etched in the physical and emotional scars of those who lived through it. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Hiroshima awoke like any other city. Life proceeded as usual, unaware that it would soon face the horrors of modern warfare. At 8:15 a.m., the sky was split by a blinding flash followed by an explosive shockwave. The first atomic bomb, Little Boy, obliterated everything within its reach. Those near the epicenter were vaporized instantly, leaving behind nothing but ruin. The heat was so intense that survivors farther out suffered severe burns, with skin melting and eyes searing from the radiation. Dr. Michihiko Hata, a survivor, described seeing processions of ghostly figures, people forever disfigured by the explosion, staggering through the streets in unimaginable pain. The horrors of Hiroshima were not confined to the immediate aftermath. The long-term effects were even more devastating. Hibakusha, the survivors, faced not only physical disfigurement from burns and radiation, but also the psychological trauma of living through the nightmare. Many suffered from exhaustion and emotional distress, haunted by the memory of the disaster. In the following years, radiation-induced diseases, including leukemia and various cancers, continued to take lives, with survivors enduring physical pain and loss for decades. Just 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, Nagasaki was hit by a second bomb, Fat Man. Although it was a more powerful weapon than Little Boy, the mountainous geography of the city limited the bomb's physical reach. Nevertheless, Fat Man still caused immense devastation, killing approximately 40,000 people instantly, with thousands more dying from radiation sickness in the aftermath. Despite the bomb's slightly limited physical damage, the human toll was immense, and Nagasaki suffered the same painful consequences as Hiroshima. Amid the devastation, stories of survival and resilience emerged. One notable survivor, Dr. Takashi Nagi, a Catholic radiologist, survived the blast despite being exposed to lethal doses of radiation. His survival, along with the stories of other hibakusha, symbolized the endurance of the human spirit even in the face of unimaginable suffering. Their experiences became vital testimonies, not only of the physical destruction but also of the profound psychological and emotional toll the bombs left on the survivors. For the hibakusha, the most enduring impact of the bombings was the suffering that followed. Survivors lived with the scars of radiation burns, the constant threat of cancer, and the ongoing pain of lost loved ones. Yet in their suffering they also became witnesses, their voices rising to remind the world of the horrors of nuclear warfare. Their stories served as warnings to future generations about the destructive potential of atomic weapons and the need for peace in the nuclear age. The legacy of radiation, an immortal impact. The explosions that marked Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, 1945, were not only the beginning of immediate devastation, but the start of a dark legacy that continues today, decades later. The radiation released by the atomic bombs spread beyond the limits of the cities, affecting the air, land, and human bodies in ways that persist to this day. This invisible phenomenon, a radioactive cloud that did not discriminate, infiltrated the environment, transforming not only the physical landscape, but also the very structure of life in the region. The radiation not only ravaged the cities, but also left a trail in nature. Like a slowly spreading shadow, its effects were felt in the local flora and fauna. The trees that once symbolized life in Hiroshima and Nagasaki withered, their trunks blackened and their leaves fallen, a testament to the violence of the radiation. Some animals, such as the rice rat Oromis quasi, disappeared entirely, while others suffered irreparable mutations, affecting the region's biodiversity for generations. This ecological disaster was not just an isolated chapter. Its effects were perpetuated in the genetics and survival of species. For the survivors, known as hibakusha, the suffering did not end with the initial impact of the bombs. The first days after the explosion were filled with instant death. But the aftermath of radiation led to diseases and conditions that would continue to devastate the survivors for years. Leukemia, cancer, and other radiation-induced diseases claimed countless lives over the decades. What was most somber was that not only the hibakusha faced the consequences, initial fears that genetic defects could spread to future generations were exacerbated by anxiety, but in many cases, they were confirmed as true. Although widespread birth defects did not materialize on a large scale, the atomic curse continued to haunt the affected families. The children and grandchildren of the survivors faced higher rates of cancer and other radiation-related disorders, indirectly inheriting the weight of the tragedy. The impact of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki extended far beyond Japan, altering the course of world history. These events marked the beginning of the nuclear age, one that provoked constant fear of a global war of mass destruction. The vision of radiation's consequences left an indelible mark on humanity's collective conscience, motivating the creation of global movements for nuclear disarmament and leading to the signing of international agreements to prevent the use of atomic weapons. The horrors experienced in these two cities were not only a national tragedy but a turning point in the history of humanity. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of the destructive power that humans had unleashed upon themselves. These tragedies sparked the emergence of a new awareness of the dangers of nuclear weapons and the potential for global devastation. Today, the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki continue to resonate in global discussions about the use of nuclear energy, both for energy production and military defense. The legacy of radiation and its collateral effects remain a hot topic in global politics and diplomacy. Although many countries have renounced the use of nuclear weapons, the threat still lingers. The survivors and their descendants continue to carry the mark of that day, while the world continues to search for a balance between technological progress and ethical responsibility. The impact of radiation is not something that can be easily erased from collective memory. Each year, ceremonies are held in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to remember the victims and reinforce the global commitment to peace. The scars of radiation are not only physical but deeply emotional and psychological, leaving a persistent echo that resonates through generations.